They're rewriting my memories. I never liked the attic. Even as a kid, I'd stand at the foot of the pull-down ladder while my mother rummaged through boxes, praying she wouldn't make me climb up. Something about the smell up there, old paper and insulation dust, made my throat tighten. I thought I'd left it behind for good when I moved out at 18. But here I was, 30 years old, standing under that same hatch in my mother's house, tugging the cord while rain lashed the roof. She died 3 months ago, heart attack. Sudden, a neighbour found her 2 days too late. I'd flown back to claim what little there was. An old 2-story farmhouse at the edge of Hollow Creek, a scattering of debts, and closets full of things I'd tried to forget. I told myself I'd do it quickly one weekend to pack, donate, or trash everything. But the attic loomed like unfinished business. So on my last night there, I poured a glass of wine, dragged a rickety chair under the hatch, and climbed up. It was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just bigger, hunched under the sloped beams. My flashlight beam caught boxes labelled Christmas, Grandma's China, old tax files. Dust flurried with every step. I was about to leave when I saw them. Albums. Dozens of them, stacked neatly in a milk crate that looked new. The covers were leather, dark green, the corners unscuffed. They didn't match my mother's hoarder style. She'd always thrown photos into random cardboard shoeboxes, loose Polaroids curling in the heat. These were too neat, too deliberate. I sat cross-legged on the plywood floor and flipped open the first album. The smell of new paper and fresh glue made my stomach twist. Inside were photos of me. Some were ones I recognized my 6th birthday party, wearing a paper crown and blowing out candles shaped like the number 6. But the people standing behind me weren't right. A tall man with thick glasses had his hands on my shoulders. I squinted. My father? He'd left before I was born. I'd never even seen his face in a photo. But this man looked like someone I'd known, familiar, yet out of place. I flipped to the next page. Me, age 10, in a Halloween costume witch's hat, fake wart on my nose, standing on our front porch. But the porch was wrong. The railing was painted green. It was always white. The house number was 147, not 134. A chill unspooled down my spine. I closed the album, opened the next. High school, prom. A boy I didn't know smiling beside me, his arms slung around my bare shoulders like we were in love. His face was just familiar enough that my brain itched, trying to slot him into place. The date on the back read May 2009, the year I'd skipped prom entirely because I'd been grounded for sneaking out. Page after page. Years I'd lived, but not like this. Friends I didn't remember. Rooms I'd never stepped foot in. Holidays that never happened. I slammed the last album shut and sat in the dust, heartbeat rattling my ribs. I told myself it was a prank, someone playing a cruel joke. But who? My mother had no one. I had no siblings, no cousins close enough to sneak in and spend hours crafting fake photos. I needed air. I shoved the albums back into the crate, but when I touched the last one, I felt something wet. I jerked my hand away. The leather cover glistened under my flashlight, like condensation on a glass. I brushed it again, and the surface shifted, rippling under my fingertips. I opened it. The first page was blank. I flipped blank, blank, blank. The last page held one photo, me sitting cross-legged in the attic, holding a photo album, eyes wide with terror. Taken from the rafters, like someone had perched there and aimed a camera at me in the last 60 seconds. The crate slipped from my hands, photos scattering across the floor. I scrambled back down the ladder, the hatch swinging shut above me. I slept in my childhood bedroom that night, the door locked, the hall light on. I left the next morning at dawn, rain still falling like a curse. A week later, I was back in my own apartment in the city, concrete, sirens, the hum of traffic outside my window, all comforting reminders that the world was normal, real. I told myself I'd imagined it, that grief, stress, and too much wine had scrambled my brain. Then the package came. It was waiting by my door when I got home from work, plain brown cardboard, no return address. The handwriting on the label was my mother's. I knew that loop in the Y of my name anywhere. I used my keys to slit the tape open, my hands shaking. Inside were the albums, all of them, stacked neatly, corners sharp, the top one still damp like it had been pulled from a freezer. I didn't want to, but I opened it. The first page showed my tiny kitchen, the yellow-tiled walls, the coffee mug I'd left on the counter that morning. I was standing by the sink, smiling. Behind me, a man stood with his hand on my back, the same man from the prom photo. In this one, his eyes were wrong. Black, empty sockets like someone had burned them out. I slammed the album shut and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a wet slap and fell open on the carpet. New photos fluttered loose, glossy and damp. One drifted to my feet. Me, asleep in my bed last night, the blankets twisted around my legs. In the corner of the frame, the edge of a hand, pale and long-fingered, reaching for my throat. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, all the lights blazing, clutching my phone like a weapon. I didn't know who to call. The police? And say that my dead mother was mailing me impossible photo albums? At dawn, I threw the albums into the dumpster behind my building. I stood there, waiting for a neighbor to pass by so I wouldn't be alone, then forced myself back upstairs. I found one on my pillow, waiting. Same green leather cover, the same smell fresh glue, wet ink. I opened it with trembling fingers. A single photo, me standing at the dumpster, holding the crate. It wasn't just recording me, it was rewriting me. I called my best friend, Mara. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. I'd pushed her away like I pushed everyone away when grief got too heavy. But when she answered, I burst into tears, words tumbling out in broken pieces. She showed up 20 minutes later, hair in a messy bun, coffee in one hand, keys in the other. She sat me down, made me drink water, asked me to start from the beginning. I showed her the album, the photo of the dumpster, the ones of my bed, the man with the empty eyes. Mara didn't flinch. She was always better at being calm than I was. "This is messed up," she said. "You're not crazy, okay? I believe you. Let's figure this out." She flipped through the rest of the album, her brow furrowed. Then she froze. She held up one photo. "This wasn't here before," she said. It showed the two of us, sitting on my couch exactly as we were now, but outside the living room window, pressed against the glass, was the man. Tall, blurred at the edges like a smudge of oil, his hollow eyes locked on me. We both looked up. The window was dark, nothing there, but when Mara leaned closer, she let out a choked noise. A handprint, faint but unmistakable, smeared on the outside of the glass. 4 long fingers and a thumb, dripping something black. We stayed awake all night. Every time we looked at the album, new photos were there, some still developing, the images swimming under the glossy surface like fish under ice. They showed things that hadn't happened yet. Me and Mara in my kitchen, the man standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder. Mara asleep on my couch, a smear of blood across her forehead. Me holding her hand in an empty room that looked like a hospital. "Who is he?" I whispered. "Why me?" But Mara just shook her head. "We'll figure it out. We'll get help. We just have to stay together, okay? Together." But in the final photo, the one we found right before dawn, we weren't together. It showed me standing alone at the foot of my mother's attic ladder, looking up into the dark. Behind me, the man's shadow stretched across the floor. We left the apartment as the sun rose, albums locked in the trunk of Mara's car. She drove while I sat with my arms wrapped around myself, trying not to look at the rearview mirror. I kept seeing his shape in every passing shadow, a tall smear of darkness that lingered at the edge of my vision. Mara took me to a psychic, her mother's idea. I would have laughed if I hadn't been so hollow. The woman's tiny shop smelled like burnt sage and old incense. She sat me in a chair, took one look at the photo album Mara pulled from her bag, and paled. She wouldn't touch it. "There are things," she said, voice trembling, "that don't belong in memory. Things that slip through when the veil is thin. They use what you remember and what you don't to make themselves real." Mara squeezed my hand. "Can it be stopped?" The psychic looked at me, really looked, like she was peering through my eyes to something rotting behind them. "You're the anchor," she said. "Without you, it can't exist, but it won't let you go." Not until it finishes writing its story. We slept at Mara's that night. Or tried to. She set up an air mattress beside her bed so I wouldn't be alone. But I lay awake, heart pounding at every creak of the old pipes, every branch tapping the window. Around 3 a.m., Mara sat up suddenly. "Do you hear that?" I held my breath. The rustle came again, paper, thick and wet, sliding across the floor. I turned on my phone's flashlight and saw them. The albums, all of them stacked neatly at the foot of my bed. I grabbed the top one and opened it. The first photo showed Mara and me, lying exactly as we were, except a dark figure crouched between us, one hand pressed to Mara's chest, fingers sinking through her skin like water. The next photo was worse. Mara's eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a scream that never came. I dropped the album and turned to her. She was still, too still. I shook her, called her name. Her skin felt like wax. Then I saw the bruise, a spreading, black mark blooming under her collarbone in the shape of a hand. The albums on the floor began to flutter, pages turning by themselves. New photos developed in the dark, the faint scratch of paper on paper filling the room like rats in the walls. They're rewriting my memories, and they're not finished yet. I don't remember calling 911. Maybe I didn't. Maybe someone else did, a neighbor hearing me scream, or the house itself growing bored of the mess it made. The paramedics found me in the corner of Mara's bedroom, rocking back and forth with my hands pressed to my temples like I could hold my brain together. They said it was an aneurysm. Mara, my best friend since college, dead at 29. I wanted to tell them it wasn't true that I'd seen the bruise blooming under her skin in the shape of a handprint, that I'd watched the photo albums shift and turn, rewriting her death before my eyes. But when I tried to speak, my voice stuck in my throat like chewed glass. They took me to the station for questioning, but they didn't hold me long. There were no signs of forced entry, no drugs in Mara's system, no motive. "Tragic, but natural," the detective said, his eyes flicking toward my hands. He noticed the tremor that wouldn't stop. "Are you sure you're okay to go home?" Home? Where was that now? My mother's house was ashes. My apartment was crawling with those albums. Mara's place was cordoned off in yellow tape, her mother howling grief in the driveway. I went to a hotel by the interstate, the kind where the curtains never quite close and the carpet sticks to your socks. I lay on the bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, afraid to close my eyes. Every time I blinked, I saw it. That shape in the photos, the man with the black eyes, slipping his hands into my life, like he was kneading it like clay. At dawn, I woke to find a new photo album sitting on the little table by the window. I didn't touch it at first, I just sat there, heart pounding, counting the seams in the cheap wallpaper until the sun rose high enough that the room felt safe again. Finally, I cracked it open. The first photo was my mother, young and beautiful, wearing her old summer dress. She stood in front of our house, pregnant. Her hands cradled her stomach, but the shadows fell in just such a way that it looked like a stranger's hands wrapped around her belly from behind long, pale fingers digging into the floral print. The next few pages were pictures I'd never seen, me as a baby, lying in a cradle that I didn't remember, a pale blur hovering in the corner of every shot. Sometimes it looked like a trick of the light, or a glare on the lens. But as I flipped, the blur sharpened a figure standing just behind my crib, its face smeared and empty, its hands always reaching. At the end of the album was a Polaroid tucked into a plastic sleeve. It was dated 1 month ago. It showed my mother in her recliner, eyes closed, mouth slack, dead. But standing behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder like a lover, was the figure sharper now, its face more human, but not mine. And yet, it had my eyes. I dropped the album like it burned. I backed away until my calves hit the edge of the bed. I couldn't stop shaking. The TV flickered on by itself, static dancing on the screen. The whisper came again, this time inside my head. "You were never alone." I called my mother's old neighbor, Mrs. Henley, the one who'd found her. I needed to know if she'd seen anything that night. Maybe a car parked on the curb, or someone lurking by the porch. Anything that made sense. Her voice cracked when she heard me. "Oh, sweetheart, I've been meaning to call. I thought you might want these." She told me that after the police left, she'd cleaned out the house as a favor old lady neighborly duty, she called it. But there was something odd in the crawl space under the porch, she said. A box of your baby clothes, but they weren't quite right. Not right how? I asked. Stained. And there were photos, hundreds of them, but the pictures didn't look real, not like any photos I've ever seen. I told her I'd be there that afternoon. She sounded relieved. I'll have tea ready, she said. It'll be good to see a familiar face. But when I pulled up, her house was dark. The curtains were drawn. The air tasted wrong like pennies, and something rancid left in the sun too long. I knocked. No answer. I let myself in. The smell hit me first, sour, coppery, a sharp undercurrent of rot. I found her in the kitchen, slumped over the table. Her teacup lay shattered on the floor, the tea still steaming. A single photo lay face up beside her hand. It was me, standing on her porch, smiling with my hand on her shoulder. In the window behind us, the figure leaned close, its mouth pressed to the glass like a smear of oil. The police took my statement, but by now they looked at me like I was the common denominator no one wanted to name. They asked if I'd touched the body, if I'd been inside before. If I had any history of mental illness, I wanted to scream at them. Check the photos. Look at the albums. But when they searched her house, they found no box, no old baby clothes, no photos. They let me go, but not before a young cop, couldn't have been more than 25, walked me to my car. His eyes flicked to the back seat where the albums sat stacked like corpses. You should get rid of those, he said quietly. My grandmother used to say some memories aren't ours to keep. You know what I mean? I didn't answer. I just drove away, the albums rattling every time I hit a bump. Back at the hotel, I spread the albums on the bed. There were more now, 10, 15. I lost count. I flipped through them all, page after page of impossible scenes. Me and Mara as kids, even though we'd met in college. Me and my mother posing in front of a hospital I'd never visited. A wedding where I wore a white dress I'd never owned, kissing the man with the empty eyes. A child on my hip, a little girl with my nose, my curls. But her eyes were hollow sockets dripping black. Every time I closed an album, another one slid out from under the bed, or the closet, or the bathroom sink, like they were breeding in the dark. I don't know how long I sat there, shuffling photos like tarot cards, trying to find an answer in the mess. Finally, I found it. One photo, a memory that didn't feel fake. It was my mother, sitting on the attic floor, surrounded by the albums. She looked exhausted, her eyes bruised with sleeplessness. In the background, I was a child again, 5 or 6, standing by the attic hatch, peeking in. But the real horror was in the corner, the figure, clearer than ever, kneeling behind my mother, its hands pressed to her temples, its mouth open wide, whispering into her skull. The date on the back was June 1999, the year she started telling people she saw shadows in the mirrors, the year she was diagnosed. It didn't start with me. It had always been here. I fell asleep at dawn, the albums piled like bricks around me. I dreamed of my mother's voice, soft and cracked. They're rewriting your memories. They did it to me. They'll do it to her. Who? I asked. But she didn't answer. When I woke, my phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. It was just a photo, blurry, dark. It showed me, standing in the burned shell of my mother's house, holding something that looked like a child. In the attic window above me, the figure watched. Beneath the photo, 2 words, "Come home." I didn't want to. Every cell in my body told me to run. But the pull was stronger than fear, a hook in my brain, tugging me back to where it all began. I drove out of the city that afternoon, the sky bruised with rolling clouds. The farmhouse sat like a rotten tooth on the edge of Hollow Creek, half-eaten by fire but still standing. The attic hatch hung open, the ladder extended, waiting. Inside, the air was thick with mold and wet ash. The living room was stripped bare, no furniture, no photos on the walls, just soot stains like claw marks across the ceiling. Up in the attic, the albums were there, hundreds of them now, stacked from floor to rafters. They hummed when I touched them, like a heartbeat under leather. In the center of the floor sat an old metal trunk. I knew it before I even opened it. I'd seen it in the photos. Inside were more memories. Polaroids, reels of Super 8 film, letters written in my mother's shaky hand. The same figure, over and over, lurking at the edges of every frame. Beneath it all, wrapped in a rotting blanket, was a baby's bonnet, stained dark with something I didn't want to name. And under that, a single slip of paper in my mother's handwriting. You were never supposed to remember. The albums behind me began to rustle, pages turning on their own. I felt them crawl under my skin, rewriting the parts of me I thought were real, my first word, my first steps, my first lie. I saw flashes, my mother's eyes wide with terror as the figure whispered into her head, Mara's slack face as it pressed its hand to her chest, Mrs. Henley's cup shattering in slow motion. And always the same truth underneath. Every memory I owned was borrowed. When I stumbled back down the ladder, the sun had vanished. The farmhouse felt alive, the walls pulsed like lungs, the floorboards creaked with every heartbeat. I heard the figure behind me, its voice the sound of tearing film. You're the story, the album, and you're not done yet. I don't remember leaving the farmhouse. 1 second I was standing in the attic, the albums shifting and whispering like a nest of insects. The next, I was back in my car, my palms bloody where I dug my nails into them. The roads out of Hollow Creek looked wrong. I know that sounds stupid, a road's a road, but the turns felt sharper, the trees too close, the sky the wrong shade of grey. At one point, I swear the same dead raccoon appeared at 3 different bends in the road, its body bloated and split open, flies drifting up like ash. I called the only person I could think of Daniel Ross, an old high school friend. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered him as the kind of guy who'd once driven 6 hours just to help me move a couch. If anyone would listen, it'd be him. His number was still in my phone. When he picked up, his voice sounded older, more tired than I remembered, but warm, solid. Hey Ellie. Wow, it's been, 15 years? Too long, I said. I didn't recognize my own voice, flat, brittle, like it was coming from another room. Daniel, I need help. I think I'm losing it. He hesitated just a beat before answering. Tell me where you are. I ended up at his place that night, a little rented house out by the old train yard. He opened the door in sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, hair sticking up like he'd just woken from a nightmare. He pulled me inside without a word. He didn't flinch when I told him about the albums, how they showed things that never happened, how they were rewriting my past. I half expected him to laugh, but he just sat there on the frayed couch, his eyes locked on mine. You always said your mum was different, he said finally. Remember that summer you told me she used to wake up screaming, saying there were people in the walls? I nodded. My chest felt too tight to breathe. Daniel rubbed his jaw, staring at the coffee table like it might have answers. What if it's not the photos? What if it's you? I flinched. What do you mean? You said they're rewriting your memories. What if your memories were never real to begin with? The room went cold. Why would they do that? Who? Not who, he said. He leaned forward, lowering his voice like the walls were listening. My grandfather told me a story once about these things. Not ghosts, not demons. Something older, parasites that feed on stories. They find someone, fragile or alone, and they crawl inside your life. Rewrite it. Harvest your fear, your grief, your guilt. They eat what you believe. His eyes flicked to the window. The glass was fogging over, though we hadn't spoken a word for minutes. You're telling me there's something inside my head, making me remember things that didn't happen? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We slept on the couch, blankets pulled up to our chins like kids at a sleepover. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure standing behind Daniel now, its empty eyes dripping black onto his shoulders. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke up to the rustle of pages. I opened my eyes to find one of the albums lying on the floor in front of us, its cover split like a wound. Daniel was still asleep, his breathing deep and even, but the album showed him different, his chest caved in, his eyes staring at nothing, and standing over him, me, smiling, blood on my hands. I slapped him awake. He jolted up, confused, blinking sleep from his eyes. Ellie, it's here, I hissed. We have to burn them. Now. He didn't argue. We gathered every album I'd brought, stuffed them into a metal trash can in the backyard. Daniel doused them in lighter fluid, his hands trembling so badly he dropped the can twice. When the match caught, the flame leapt high, black smoke rolling into the night. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, trying to believe it would work. But the smell, it wasn't paper and ink. It was hair, skin, the stink of something alive curling up in the heat. Daniel turned to me, his mouth twisted in horror. Ellie, what the hell did we just burn? We went back inside, but I couldn't rest. Every creak in the old pipes, every gust of wind against the windows felt like a whisper at the edge of hearing. At 3 a.m., the door to the spare bedroom creaked open. I knew what I'd see before I turned my head. A new album propped against the doorframe. Still wet, pages fluttering like a dying bird. Daniel stared at it. He looked more afraid than I'd ever seen him. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't open it." But my hands moved on their own. The first page was a photo of me standing in that backyard, staring at the fire. In the smoke behind me, the figure loomed clearer than ever. A man-shaped absence, skin pale as milk, eyes hollow craters that bled into the sky. The next photo made my throat close. It showed Daniel, asleep on the couch. A new bruise bloomed under his jaw, a handprint, black as ink. His mouth was open in a scream I knew would never come. I looked up. Daniel was standing right there, breathing, alive. But as I watched, his eyes went glassy. He swayed on his feet. I caught him before he hit the floor. He was still warm, still here. I slapped his face, begged him to open his eyes. They fluttered once, then stilled. The albums rustled behind me, pages flipping faster than I could breathe. I knew what I'd see if I looked. New photos, new endings, none of them mine. I don't know how long I sat there, rocking Daniel's body. At some point, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from the same unknown number as before. They're waiting in the attic. I buried him behind the house. The ground was too hard, the frost biting into my hands until my skin split. But I needed him somewhere that felt real, even if none of this was. I stood at the foot of the shallow grave, gasping cold air, the albums piled around me like gravestones. They hummed under the snow, heat radiating from them like fever. I opened the top one. The photos had changed again. Me, standing at my mother's attic hatch. Me, holding a baby with empty eyes. Me, older than I am now, sitting in a rocking chair while the figure leans over my shoulder, its mouth pressed to my ear. Beneath each photo, a word scrawled in my mother's handwriting. Rewrite. The next day, I drove back to Hollow Creek for the last time. The farmhouse felt smaller than ever, half sunken into the dead earth. The roof sagged, the porch rotted to splinters. But the attic ladder was down, waiting, like a tongue lolling from a jaw. I climbed. The albums were gone. In their place, the attic floor was covered in photos, thousands of them, Polaroids and prints, some so new they still glistened with chemicals. They showed every moment I'd ever lived, and moments I hadn't. My first breath, my first kiss, my first lie, my mother rocking a baby that wasn't me, the figure standing at the foot of my childhood bed. Daniel's grave, fresh and muddy. In the center of it all stood the figure, or maybe it sat. It was hunched over a single album, its fingers long and thin, pages turning without touching them. It looked up. Its face was mine, not exactly, but close enough that my stomach turned. The eyes were hollow, swirling with black. It spoke in my voice, but layered with something deeper, older. You made us. You keep us fed. I shook my head. What are you? It smiled, and every photo on the floor twitched like a dying insect. You're the story, it said. We're the storyteller. We feed on what you remember and what you wish you didn't. I took a step forward. The floor creaked under my weight, the photos curling away from my feet like leaves in fire. Why me? Its grin widened. Your mother opened the door. She wanted to forget. So we gave her new memories, sweeter ones, softer ones. But the hunger grows. It needs more stories. It stood, unfolding like smoke. Its hand brushed my cheek cold, damp, the texture of old paper. "You could end it," it whispered. "Close the album, tear out the last page." I felt it then, the weight in my pocket. A single Polaroid I hadn't realized I'd kept. Me and Daniel smiling on that ratty couch before any of this started. The last real memory I had. I held it tight, but the figure leaned closer, its breath like mildew. "Or you could let us finish. We'll rewrite you better. Happier. No grief, no loss, no pain, just stories." Behind its shoulder, the photos shifted again. One showed me, older, rocking a baby in a sunlit nursery. Another showed Daniel, alive, standing beside me. My mother, whole and healthy, gardening in the yard. A life that never happened, but could. My fingers shook. The attic seemed to breathe around me, rafters swelling like lungs. The figure waited, its mouth a black slash. I pressed the Polaroid to my chest. I could feel it, the choice. Tear it up, and the stories would starve. Or let it go, and let them write me into something I could never have. The attic floor trembled under my feet. The photos lifted like wings. I closed my eyes. I don't know how long I stood there in the attic, my heart beating out of rhythm with the thing that wore my face. All around me, the photos rustled and whispered. If I strained my ears, I could almost make out words, like dozens of voices overlapping my mother's laughter, Mara's teasing, Daniel's warm, sleepy drawl. So many echoes of moments I wanted back. The Polaroid in my hand felt warm now, as if it were alive. My thumb traced the image of Daniel's smile. He looked like he had in high school, unguarded, kind, believing I was someone worth driving 6 hours for. "You could see him again," the figure said. Its voice was both inside me and outside, an echo bouncing through the attic beams. "You could have the mother you always wanted, the life you deserved." It gestured to the photos on the floor. They shifted like oil on water, showing new scenes I'd never lived. Birthdays with friends who never died. Holidays where my mother was young and vibrant. A house that never burned. A daughter with my nose and Daniel's gentle eyes. I felt the stories seeping into my mind, not as memories, but as desires, feeding the hunger in my chest. A soft hand brushed mine the figure, so close I could see the skin at its wrists fraying like wet paper. "Say yes," it whispered. "We'll rewrite you perfect." I felt the attic fade. I was on a porch with Mara, drinking lemonade while our kids played in the yard. Daniel came out, kissed my cheek. My mother called me from the kitchen, her voice light and sweet. And then, in the haze of that beautiful lie, I heard something else. A child's cry, thin, weak, a sound I'd never heard before, and yet it pulled me back like a hook in my spine. I forced my eyes open. The figure tilted its head, studying me with my own eyes. "You hear her, don't you?" it asked, gently amused. "Who is she?" I whispered. It ran its long fingers through my hair. "She was almost yours. We needed something real to anchor the story, something that hurt." It stepped aside, revealing the center of the attic, a cradle that hadn't been there before. It was old, splintered, draped with a lace blanket that looked like it had been soaked in something dark. Underneath, something squirmed, too small, too soft. I stumbled forward, knees buckling. My hands shook as I lifted the blanket. A baby, or what was left of one. Its skin was grey and translucent, its eyes wide open and empty, its tiny mouth opened and closed in silence. A photo lay on its chest. I forced myself to look. It showed me holding her in the hospital, beaming with exhausted joy. Daniel's hand rested on my shoulder. My mother stood at my side, alive and healthy, tears shining on her cheeks. A life that never happened. But the baby was real. "What did you do?" I breathed. The figure leaned down, its face inches from mine. "She was the first draft," it said. "You were never supposed to keep her, but you clung so hard to your grief. You made her real enough for us to feed on." I felt something inside me tear like a seam splitting. I saw my mother again, hunched in the attic with the albums, hands pressed to her skull to hold the stories in. I saw Mara's wide, frozen eyes, Daniel's slack face, all the people I loved rewritten into food. The figure smiled. "Let go," it whispered. "We'll fix it. No pain, no loss, just the story you deserve." I looked down at the tiny thing in the cradle. Her fingers twitched once, like she was trying to reach me. I realized then that this was the price, the endless rewriting, the endless hunger for more. They'd taken her first. They'd keep taking. Unless I closed the story. I pressed the Polaroid of me and Daniel to the cradle, tucking it under the baby's tiny hand. "No more," I said. The figure hissed, its skin rippling like water in a storm. The photos on the floor began to curl and blacken at the edges. "You can't," it said. "We live in you. We are you." I ignored it. I gathered the photos, handfuls of glossy paper, memories real and false. I piled them into the cradle, burying the tiny body under snapshots of all the lives I never had. Then I reached into my pocket and found the lighter I'd taken from Daniel's house. The figure lunged for me, its mouth splitting wide, but I struck the flame before it could touch me. The cradle went up in a roar of heat and rotten sweetness. The figure reeled back, its face splitting into a dozen, all versions of me weeping, laughing, screaming. The photos crackled, burned, the voices inside them shrieking as they curled into ash. I woke up in the yard. The farmhouse behind me was ablaze, the attic windows glowing like angry eyes. I couldn't feel my hands, couldn't feel much of anything. When the fire trucks came, they asked what happened. I told them the truth, that the house was old, full of rot, full of ghosts that needed to go. They took me away in an ambulance. The paramedic asked if there was anyone I could call. Mara's face flickered in my mind. Daniel's too. I shook my head. "No one," I whispered. "They're gone." Weeks passed. I stayed in a half-empty motel on the edge of town. I tried to tell myself it was over, that I'd burned the last page. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see her, the baby with my nose and empty eyes, reaching for me through smoke. And sometimes, in the shadows of the cheap lamp by my bed, I see the figure softer now, less certain, like it knows its story is dying. But every morning when I wake, there's a photo on my pillow. Always a new one. Always a moment I don't remember living. They're weaker now, faded. I think that means they're starving. But I know this hunger never really dies. They're rewriting my memories. And every time they do, they get closer to finding a new ending.